Hey, good evening, South Mississippi. Chief Meteorologist Eric Jeansonne here. The quick update on the forecast, but first thing we're going to talk about is what everyone is kind of focused in on is as we head into the weekend, there continues to be a signal in the long-range forecast guidance that the pattern could favor a winter storm across the deep south. But the big question is, how far south is that wintry weather going to make it? And right now, it's a little too early to say exactly how far south that's going to go, but the overall pattern favors cold air heading our way this weekend. At the same time, an area of low pressure will likely track across somewhere along the southern U.S. or along the Gulf Coast. That low pressure is going to bring with it a lot of moisture to work with that cold air. And the uncertainty right now is exactly where is that moisture and that cold air going to meet up. So in general, about 7 to 10 days out before a weather event, models are pretty good at just kind of picking up the overall big picture of the pattern. But this far out, it's too early to get those smaller details like how far south is the freezing line going to go and exactly what time is that moisture going to make its way towards South Mississippi. All of those things matter because the timing is everything. If that moisture gets here too soon, before the cold air gets here, then we can't see any wintry weather. However, if the cold air gets here before the moisture does, then that moisture is going to have all the cold air to work with, and we could see that potential for some wintry weather. And early signals are that this may not necessarily be a snowstorm. It could potentially be an ice storm, and I'll talk more about that coming up. But first, here's the overall setup, kind of looking at some of the model guidance. This is the European model, which has been fairly consistent with setting up rain along the Gulf Coast. The pink area, that's freezing rain. Now, freezing rain is not the same as sleet, and it is definitely not the same as snow. Freezing rain falls as a liquid. It looks like rain, but whenever it hits a surface, it freezes on contact and it creates a glaze of ice. So freezing rain can be very deceiving and it can also be very destructive. An ice storm is one of the most destructive winter storms that you can possibly have because ice has a very high weight content and it can cause disruptions like power outages, bring trees down, things like that. So not saying that that's going to happen here on the Gulf Coast, but somewhere along that I-20 corridor or maybe a little bit further south, could be looking at the potential for a disruptive ice storm as we head into the weekend. Of course, pinpointing exactly where those freezing rain areas are going to set up, a little difficult at this point because we're still too far out in advance. And looking at futurecasting again, as we go into Saturday night into Sunday morning, that moisture continues to move off towards the north and east. And one of the big signals is that there continues to be this idea that there could be a lot of moisture to work with and a lot of cold air, and those two things are never good. Here's another graphic kind of depicting on what I was just talking about the track of that area of low pressure. You know, around low pressure in the northern hemisphere, the air flows counterclockwise. So as an area of low pressure goes from west to east, ahead of it, you get southerly winds. Those southerly winds create what we call a warm sector. The warm air begins to surge to the north. On the backside of that area of low pressure, the winds are the opposite. They're coming out of the north, and that's the cold sector of the area of low pressure. And so the track of the low is going to dictate what kind of wintry weather you see. So if that area of low pressure were to take the first track, track 1, a little bit further north, further inland, that would put pretty much the Gulf Coast in the warm sector of the area of low pressure. That would keep predominantly our area seeing mostly just rain. Now, if that area of low pressure tracks a little bit further south, then that would put more of the Gulf Coast in the cold sector of the storm, and we would have a better opportunity of seeing some type of wintry weather. And again, when you're this far out in advance, we're about 6 to 7 days out from this, it is a little too difficult to know where that area of low pressure is going to track because, well, it hasn't formed yet. So We have to wait for that area of low pressure to form in order to get a better idea of where it's going to go. So let's talk more about why this may be more of an ice situation instead of a snow situation. Here's a look at a temperature profile of the atmosphere and in general what we kind of see in the wintertime. If the air way where the cloud is below freezing, you'll most likely start off as snow. But as that snow falls through a column of air that is above freezing, it melts. And if it's above freezing from the surface all the way to the cloud, well then it's mostly just rain. However, sometimes you can get a situation where the precipitation in the cloud starts off frozen, it starts off as snow, but then it falls through a layer of warm air. But then right at the surface, there's a very thin layer of temperatures below freezing. That is how you get freezing rain. It starts off as snow, it melts, but then it falls back into a layer of temperatures below freezing. And once it comes in contact with the surface, it creates a glaze of ice. So freezing rain looks more like kind of what whenever you put a glaze over a donut. It causes a glaze of ice over trees and power lines and roadways, and it can be incredibly destructive. It can cause power outages. It can cause travel to be treacherous. It can cause trees to fall down. So that's why we don't want to see any kind of freezing rain. Now, sometimes in the wintertime, you'll start off as snow, and then you'll fall through a very small layer of warm air, and then you have a thicker column of below freezing temperatures at the surface. So there's a little bit more time for that precipitation to start to freeze before it hits the ground. That is sleet. It has time to freeze back into an ice pellet, but it doesn't have enough time to crystallize into a snowflake. So that is the difference between the snow and the freezing rain and rain. And of course, if the column of air from the cloud all the way to the surface is below freezing, then there's plenty of time for that water droplet to crystallize into a snowflake and make its way all the way to the ground. Now, is it possible to get snowflakes even though the temperature might be slightly above freezing at the surface? Yes, if the column of air is below freezing from the cloud all the way to the ground, but maybe just that last maybe 100 feet, 200 feet down at the surface, the temperature is above freezing, there's just simply not enough time for the snowflake to melt. But once it comes in contact with the ground, it will quickly melt because the temperature is below freezing. So you can get snowflakes falling when the temperature might be 35 or maybe 36 degrees at the surface. But above the ground, it is below freezing. So overall, the takeaway from all of this is, yes, models are hinting at a potential winter storm over the weekend. It is way too early to say if that is going to include us here on the Gulf Coast. Now, looking outside on the Hancock Whitney Bank Tower Cam in Gulfport tonight, it is a cold night. Temperatures are already in the 30s in many spots. We're 38 at the airport in Gulfport. Overnight tonight, we're looking at low 30s on the coast. Now, areas along the Pearl and Pascagoula drainage basins most likely will see temperatures colder, like around Jackson County, around Moss Point, Van Cleve, Gaucher. Those locations could likely see the 20s because you're in that area that you can get that cold air pooling in those situations. Looking at the forecast for tomorrow, we're going to start a warming trend actually tomorrow. We're going to see temperatures climbing into the 50s. In fact, some areas by the late afternoon could be close to 60 degrees in some spots. So overall, looks like a pretty nice day for your Tuesday. As far as the winds go, we do see relatively light winds to start off the day, but as we go into Tuesday evening into Wednesday morning, we're going to see more of a southerly wind developing, and that is really going to set the stage for a bigger warm-up. So before our cold blast over the weekend, temperatures are going to warm up, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a few areas getting close to 70 degrees, especially for spots north of I-10 as we go into Thursday and into Friday. So your 7-day forecast, it looks like this again. Tomorrow, chilly. As we go throughout the week, temperatures warm up. We do have the opportunity for some showers Wednesday night going to Thursday and possibly again going into Friday. And over the weekend, we're going to watch those temperatures and the potential for rain very closely.